Welcome to today's session of the Populism Seminar, where we have a small interview, a little interview with Luca Manucci. Thank you, Luca, for joining me today. I really appreciate this. Luca Manucci is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Social Sciences of the University of Lisbon. And today we will talk about your new book and the related blog. The book is called The Populism Interviews, a dialogue with leading experts, and has been published with Routledge a couple of weeks ago, actually, right? You have it as well in your hand. It's a very fancy cover. I like it quite a lot. So this has been published in September 2022, I think. And this book combines a variety of different interviews, actually 30 interviews, with leading scholars on populism and related topics. And this is actually based on an award-winning series of blogs, right? Which is really, really nice. So before talking about the blog and talking about the book, let me start with a question that you have posed to literally everybody who gave an interview in your book. And the question is, well, why are you interested in populism? What fascinates you about the topic?
So first of all, thank you, Robert, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be in your series. What interested me about populism? So, full disclosure, I did not choose the topic. The topic chose me, in the sense that I won a position for a PhD scholarship in St. Gallen, Switzerland. And it was an interdisciplinary project about populism in the media and in political parties. And I admit I didn't know much of populism before that, and we're talking 2013. I start working on this project. I love it. I think the topic is great, and I get really interested in the whole discussion around populism. And this is before 2016. I say this because it is important. There is a before and after 2016, in my opinion. Before Brexit, before Trump. It was an important topic. It was gaining traction. It was more and more relevant, but it was not the complete explosion of interest that was after 2016. So in that time, I got interested in the topic that, again, was assigned to me, but I really got super interested because of the austerity measures that the Troika implemented in the south of Europe, and the opposition between Merkel and Varoufakis, for example, the creation of new left-wing populist parties such as Syriza and Podemos during those years, the protests going on. And I got really interested in also understanding that this was not a new phenomenon. This was a new iteration of a struggle within democracy that is possibly as old as democracy. And I figured that populism essentially advocates for power to the people, which is, if you want, the true essence of democracy. But at the same time, it is allergic to some aspects of liberal democracy, to some checks and balances, to some separation of power, independence of the media, minority protection, and the series of very important things within liberal democracy. So what really got me interested was to understand that this battle between the two sides of democracy was ongoing since a very long time. And I figured how intense was in that phase the struggle. So the 2013, 14, 15 years were really crucial in defining this struggle. And I saw it evolving to the rupture point of 2016, the Brexit and Trump era, but we can talk about that later. But this is how I got interested in all of this.
Fascinating. Thanks for this quite insightful response, and also the insights into how your career developed as an early career researcher initially, right? Yeah. Maybe as a second follow-up question before we talk about the blog and the book is, where would you place yourself in the literature? What are topics that interest you? How would you briefly summarize yourself and your research agenda to somebody who doesn't know anything about you?
So my path has been, if you want, a tiny bit unorthodox, because I started my career studying media studies in Bologna. Because that's really what I wanted to study, the functioning of the media, social media that were developing at the time, 2009. But then I understood that after studying the medium, so the channel, I wanted to study something more related to the content. And in particular, I became interested in how politics use the media to spread their message, and vice versa, how the media use politics to create content to spread, which is why my master was on mass media and politics. Which is then why I arrived at this PhD scholarship, which was indeed at the juncture between the media and the political aspect of populism. Another really important strand of thought and literature that I've been following ever since, and that is still possibly the most exciting for me personally as a scholar, remains the link between populism and collective memory. As an Italian, I come from a place where, well, it's well established by now that Italy never dealt with its own fascist past. And I'm saying this exactly 100 years after the March on Rome, when Mussolini took power. And I'm saying this exactly during the formation of a new government that will bring again certain types of ideas and ways of doing politics to the fore. So it's more relevant than ever. And at the same time, my partner, for example, is German, and I always understood how much things that in Italy are normal, common, absolutely okay, in Germany are a taboo. You cannot say those things, you cannot do those things. At the same time, and then I conclude, I think it's extremely interesting what's been going on in the last years, because even in Germany, a country where normally the Nazi past was, considered unanimously as a dark page, something bad that should never be repeated. We learned from it, and now we act differently. Well, I think even there things are changing. Sweden is another example. Currently, I'm in Portugal, where for almost 50 years after the democratic transition, the radical right was never able to gain any representation, and now this is no longer the case with Chega. So I would say this trajectory brought me where I am right now, which is to study the normalization and mainstreaming of radical right parties, which might or might not use a populist rhetoric. They more often than not do, they almost all do, which is why it remains the connection to populism.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. And you can see this more interdisciplinary approach also in your book, by the way, which we will talk about later, where also communication scientists got their fair share of pages as well, I guess.
Yeah.
So long before even thinking about the book, right? You started a blog called Political Observatory on Populism, right? So this was in 2015, which also then places this in the timeline, right? You started your PhD in 2013 after a couple of months or years studying the field. You thought, oh, we need something more, I guess. And after a series of smaller blog posts or observations on contemporary politics, you published your first interview with Samuele Mazzolini, right? In April 2015.
Yeah.
So what initially motivated you to start interviewing colleagues about their work? And what was the plan back then, actually, right?
There was no plan. There was a need. My need was to have an outlet, a platform, a place where to put reflections and ideas and things that didn't fit in my more academic work. As you said, it was more or less a year and some months in my PhD. And I kept thinking, oh my God, there are so many interesting things going on. There is so much I would like to reflect upon, to study, but as you know, academia has its own time. So if you want to publish an academic paper, what happens is this: you write a draft, you probably present it at a conference or two, you receive feedback, then through this feedback you change your draft, and then when it's ready you submit it to a journal, and you probably go through a horrific line of rejections, desk rejections and whatever. So by the time it finds a home and it is published, it's probably a year or 2 years or even more years after your original idea. I needed something more quick, more agile, more where I could put all these things that I didn't have time to develop into a full-blown research project for my job. And second, I needed this outlet, this space, because there were so many aspects of populism that didn't fit in what I was supposed to study for my job. For example, the more pop culture aspects, the more stylistic elements, because what I was supposed to do was to write a code book to measure populism, train the coders, get the results, analyze them, study them, etc., which is great, which is nice. I wrote my book, first book upon that, and I don't regret it at all. Just there were so many interesting things. Why Boris Johnson has crazy hair, and so does Geert Wilders and Silvio Berlusconi. Who is Greta Thunberg, and is she a populist? All these kind of things that fascinated me, and I really needed this space. So after a year or so into my PhD, a colleague says, you should open a blog on populism. And I told him, that's not true. This is ridiculous. Who would ever want to read a blog on populism? But then I thought about it and I realized, well, I don't know what's going to happen. So as you said, there was no real plan. I just needed this space and I created it. I just learned in an afternoon how to create a WordPress blog and started publishing some reflections. The interview format came from an even different need that I had at the time, because as you well know, when you are at the beginning of your PhD, you start reading and reading and reading and reading. It's good. You start having a lot of ideas. You have to know who said what. You have to build your literature review. And so I was doing the same. And in a certain way, some authors, some papers, some chapters, some book became my companions. And I really started appreciating the thoughts behind this academic production. And I started being interested in understanding how these chapters, papers, books related to the present. Because maybe I'm thinking about the most obvious example, Kasmud, the 2004 piece for government and opposition, the populism zeitgeist. But that was 2004. That was 11, 12, 13 years before. And I needed to know from the authors of these great pieces, how do their theories and ideas spoke to the present? They're like, can you explain me Podemos or whatever in light of what you've been studying for 10 years? So this need to hear from them was exactly born out of this, of having these familiar voices in my head of great research that was published, and the need to adapt it, to use them to understand the present. And this is how I started interviewing other scholars that I just found interesting and fascinating. And this grew and grew to the point of where we are today.
Absolutely. It's also quite interesting to hear the social component underlying your endeavor here, right? Do you have the feeling that your interviews have changed over time, or how did they evolve?
They have changed over time. Before they were more general, so questions about anything, and over the time they became closer to the publications of the author. So I stopped asking questions that were too general and too broad, because I understood that many scholars replied always the same. I do not have empirical data, or I do not have a clear and objective answer to your question, therefore I'm not going to answer. So now I learned to stick more to the research of these researchers, without any way giving away what really motivates me, which is also to ask uncomfortable questions, or to expand, not to limit yourself to what you already published, because for that there would already be the article, you go, you read it, but to connect the article to the present. I think I always do it. I keep doing it because it's great. A second aspect that changed over time is most definitely the personal component. I now really love to ask, and this started with the book, I really love to ask what you asked me at the beginning. How did you get there? What pushed you to study this topic? What interested you? And what kind of voices are important in the formation of your ideas on what you study, in this case, populism. And I've started doing it in reality just for the book, which is composed of 30 interviews. I never did it before, but now I'm doing it also for the blog. And I think the most interesting parts of the book come from there. It's really cool to hear the stories of what people say about how they started, how they got there.
Absolutely. It also puts the stars in the field that you interviewed, right? You have a lot of very good scholars in this book. It gives them a very personal note, if you will, right? A very personal way of summarizing that they started as quote unquote small PhD students as well, right? And there's always a story to tell. So that's something I really like. Can you tell me a bit more about how you select potential interviewees? How do you do this? Is there a list of people you have in mind, or is it articles you read, or how do you proceed here?
As I say in the introduction, you can say what you want, but at the end of the day, this is my personal taste. There is nothing else. This is my personal taste, and which doesn't mean that those who are not in the book, I don't like them, or I only like those in the book. This is not the case for one specific reason, which is space. When Routledge told me that 200 pages was the maximum I was allowed to, I was a bit sad because I had to give up to a lot of interviews I wanted to realize for the book, but I will do them for the blog. That's not a big issue, but for sure I wanted more names in there. Then the second criteria, apart from just personal taste, I tried to implement was to have a gender balance, because, you know, it doesn't have to be 50-50 just because, but I wanted to keep some balance also because it's full of great female researchers on populism, and I wanted them to have a space there. And the third criteria was to cover as many topics as possible, to not repeat too much the same thing over and over, but to keep it very broad and to have a really broad overview. What I couldn't do, and at the beginning I thought I would have done, was a geographical distribution. Of course, I took care that there is not just a pool of European researchers. We have people from Turkey, Australia, Israel, Canada, US, Argentina, Chile, but I couldn't really expand this to Africa and most parts of Asia. And I decided either I do it and I do it properly, and then each geographical area has its own representation, or I don't. And since, as much as, you know, I study populism since 10 years, my knowledge has limitations, and what I know best is European and Latin American populism. And I decided that it was best to keep it more or less to these two areas. But this is for sure a limitation of the book, the geographical scope of it, which is also, again, linked to the space I was allowed to have, which is 200 pages. But on the bright side of things, Routledge told me that by keeping it at the 200 pages, it would have come out immediately in paperback. Which means it's immediately accessible to a large pool of students and researchers without having to wait 1 year, in which only the hardback is available for an outraging price. And that convinced me to agree with them and to say, absolutely, that's the most important thing, that it comes out and it's immediately available to a lot of people. And that's what I really wanted. So I agreed with them.
Absolutely, it makes a lot of sense, and I mean it's a lovely book. It's very approachable. So you already said when you discussed this with Routledge, then imposed certain restrictions, etc. But let's maybe move a step back, right? Mm-hmm. So you conducted quite a lot of interviews even before thinking about the book. So what made you think, oh, I should make this or get a book out of that? Or was this something where Routledge approached you, or was this something where you thought, oh, that's something I want to do, let's find a publisher for that? How did this work?
It's a funny story. When I realized I wanted to make a book out of it, I already realized over 50 for the blog. And then I realized that I wanted it to become a book because I reached a point in which I thought we can have a product that is really a great starting point for students. I thought, okay, now I know how to do it. It is time to do it if someone allows me to. It's time to put a brick there in the wall and then we can build upon, because it's time to do that. We have enough. So I contacted Routledge, in particular Craig Foley, who at the time was the editor for Routledge for all the social sciences. And to my incredible surprise, when I told him what I wanted to do, of course, I expected, as I said before, a rejection, which is the academic norm. You say things and then they get rejected. That's how normally things go. However, in this case, Craig said, oh yeah, of course, we do know your blog. It's great. We want a book of interviews to come out of it. So I was bewildered and incredibly happy. And this is how it came to become a real project. And it's crazy because in a year and 2 months, we went from signing the contract with Routledge to have it published. So it's been a relatively short amount of time, if you think about, as I said before, academic timing. And I'm very, very glad that it came out in September this year. I hope it's going really to be something that researchers, but also students and teachers can use, and hopefully also journalists could help themselves by reading that and stop using some misconceptions that I keep reading on the newspapers.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's very nice to hear the story that the outreach that you created through this blog also was at least common knowledge among some publishers, right? This is really, really nice. So you already said the vision for this book was to create an approachable introduction to populism, right? But of course, there's more to this. There is a certain vision in terms of the content. And in your introduction, you at least mentioned that there is a common thread. Can you elaborate a bit more? What's kind of the organizational vision of the book, the story you want to tell?
Exactly. So once I gave up on what I said before, so the idea of dividing it by geographical areas, because that was my first kind of idea, then I thought, no, I don't want that. I want it organized by macro themes and topics. But then I also had to avoid another trap, which is to redo a sort of, I don't know, Oxford handbook of populism. Handbooks are great. I am in the Oxford Handbook for Populism. I think it's absolutely a fantastic resource, but that's not what I wanted to do. It's already out there. What I wanted to do was something much more quick, interesting, agile, for those who are not deep into the whole of populism research already. I want something for whoever stands in front of this huge pile of production about populism. So let's say, first thing, this book, but also the blog already, is born out of this question that I keep hearing from my friends and family. What do you do? What is your job? I've been hearing this question for 10 years, and I think this book is there also for this reason, to give a quick, easy, understandable answer to that. So the whole book is thought also as a quick, easy introduction to this macro topic, because it's really scary, you know very well, and you're responsible also for this insane amount of production of academic research on populism, in the sense that the amount of books, special issues, papers, chapters, edited volumes, conferences, journals is intimidating. It was already intimidating when I started in 2013, but 10 years later, it's even more intimidating because in the last 10 years, the research on populism literally exploded. So I wanted this book also to be a compass, something that you can use to like make sense of what is going on in this field of research, which is burgeoning, as they all say. It's exploding, it's full of things. So this book is also there to give you a compass, to tell you, okay, if you're vaguely interested in these aspects, well, this is a good starting point. I'm not giving you all the answers. I'm not giving you all the experts. I'm giving you an introduction to that point, which, by the way, I think is really interesting to go back to the first question I asked to all the interviewees, which is how did you get interested to it, but also which authors you think are relevant for your approach to populism. So each chapter, each interview also has a short bibliography, 2, 3, 10 articles or papers or books that each of the interviewees gave to me as a reference point. And I think that's a great map. It's a great starting point of who is who, what has been done. And I close on this reflection, because what I noticed in the last 10 years researching populism is that we have this urge of reinventing the wheel every time. A lot has been said, probably too much, and beyond all the chaos, beyond all the noise, I think it's important to understand what has been done, and that when you publish something on populism, you have to consider that. We cannot start every single publication on populism saying that it is a contested topic. It is not even that contested because yes, there are different interpretations or definitions of what populism is, but I think what the book also wanted to show, the whole idea behind, is that, you know, at the end of the day, we all kind of agree on what populism is. You have populism anytime you have an opposition between the people and the elites. This is the core of every work on populism. And it's really pointless to keep insisting on the tiny differences between the different approaches. What really matters is that these approaches are mostly overlapping. And the first interview of the whole book goes exactly in this direction. It is with Benjamin Moffat, who presents the main types of approaches to populism and shows us in what they differ, but especially in what they are common. So this book is also there to show, hey, beyond the banal repetition of the fact that it's a contested topic, look, we have 32 people, and if you look at it, you can see that they more or less all agree exactly on what populism is.
Absolutely. I just today read the first chapter and absolutely loved it, and the very clear conceptualizations. An excellent, excellent chapter. So I think what's quite important, what you outlined just, and more on a reflection of what you said, is back when we kind of started at a similar point in time as early career researchers. At that point in time, it seemed that every populism paper kind of had to have like 2 to 3 pages about definitions, right? And you have to go into every definition. But at the end of the day, particularly for empirical work, when it's about classification of parties, it doesn't matter that much, right? Where it may be more interesting is if we think about measuring things. You mentioned the odd hair that Boris Johnson maybe has. I always use the example of the oddly knitted tie, right? This may not be that much a reflection of his ideology, but maybe more a reflection of his style as a populist. Yeah. But nonetheless, I totally agree, and I can really strongly recommend, particularly the first chapter, to kind of highlight this. So you already said quite a bit here, but if I have to ask you, what's the one thing you love most about your book? What is it?
So what I really like is that we can give a more personal touch to the whole populism research, in the sense that it really helps to understand who are these people that do research. And for me, this was one of the reasons also to start the blog and then to write the book, because I want to know, you know, you cite people, you cite a study, but what's behind that? So I think if you read this book, what comes out is the human nature of each researcher and what these people are beyond their publications. The second thing I really love is that I made sure I asked all the people I interviewed to be clear, to use a simple language. And I say this because it might seem obvious, but I don't think it's obvious. Because I strongly believe that we academics use language and jargon to protect ourselves or to put ourselves on top of the normal people out there. But this is counterproductive, because if we write things that nobody can understand, these things are pointless. And this links a bit to the whole reflection of what is academic outreach and why academic outreach is important. So what I really love about this book is that, in my opinion, it has the capacity to take the best research that has been done on populism and clean it out of all the jargon and all these definitional problems and everything, and bring it to people to read it and to understand what has been done in all these years of research on populism. Because many times I go back to what my friends and family keep asking me: what do we do? What do we study? What does that mean that you're a researcher in populism? Well, I do believe that if you read this book, you're going to understand that to a certain extent. And this is something I absolutely love about the book.
Just out of curiosity, is there a reason why there is no chapter where you get interviewed? Or is this what we do now, kind of the substitute for that?
I don't know. That's So the first time someone mentioned this was Leonie de Jonge, who actually is also in the book because I interviewed her. And then she asked me, well, why don't I interview you for once? And at the time I was busy, we didn't do that. But the reason why I'm not there is because, yes, I am myself a researcher on populism, for those who didn't know that before. But I don't know. I already have the blog at my disposal to say things that I want to say that are, going beyond the strictly academic inputs. But never say never. I think one day it might happen for sure. I wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. I'm happy to interview you, or Leonie would do an amazing job as well. I'm quite sure of that. So maybe
Or we could have 30 people interviewing.
That would work as well, I guess. So to conclude the discussion of the book, your foreword very explicitly mentions that this has been a long and winding road, right?
Yeah.
So at the same time, I guess with the book, the journey isn't over, right? So what's next? Will you just continue to do what you do, or is it no plan at all, or is there an idea of something new in a sense for this project?
So I will for sure continue in the future to do interviews, to publish articles about research on populism. I do think that on the medium term, there could also be maybe, let's see, the opportunity to do a second volume of interviews. For two reasons. First, because it keeps expanding and evolving what we do in research in populism. And second, because it was a short book, the first one, and so much I wanted to talk about remained excluded from it. So most definitely, I think there is a lot to say, a lot to discuss more. Concerning the blog, so this blog has almost 10 years, no, 8 years of life. And it costs me a lot of effort and time. I'm not complaining about this, but it is a matter of fact. And so far, I've been able to keep it up for one main reason, which is that both at the University of Zurich and then the University of Lisbon, I won outreach awards that had a monetary component that allowed me to pay, for example, the money every year to WordPress to keep the blog there, etc., etc. So it was financially doable because of that. On the long run, though, I am not entirely sure I will have the time and energies to keep it up, but I'm trying to figure out what could be a way to keep it alive without me having to do all of the work. My dream, let's say, is that some young, motivated scholars take it from there and keep doing this, but for that you need people who are happy and motivated to do such a job. So on the long run, I would say this is my idea, to leave this space for someone else to work on it and to enjoy it, and focus on something else, because I will not have the time to do it properly. And my main point is to do it properly. I don't want to just keep it up because it's there. I want to keep it up if I am happy with it and I have the time to devote to it. And the moment I don't, I hope there is someone who will be willing to keep it up.
I read this as a call for application, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So now we talked a lot about the project, the book project and the blog. And kind of as a concluding question, I mean, obviously there is this excellent scholar, Luca Manucci, as well, right? So what is it you're currently working on? What is it like we can expect from you in the next 1-2 years, in the sense, to conclude the interview?
Now I am in Lisbon, at the University of Lisbon. And it's very funny because in 2019, I won a postdoc position here. And it's crazy because the project that got funded and for which I was hired had the following title: "Why there is no populism in Portugal?" ? Now, we are in 2022, a pandemic after, and well, there is a lot of populism in Portugal. There is a lot of populism in Portugal, to the point that now I'm working mainly on trying to explain the end of the so-called Iberian exceptionalism. So Spain and Portugal transition to democracy in the 70s. After the Franco regime and the Salazar regime lasted decades, finally there is democracy, and until 2019, neither Spain nor Portugal ever had a populist radical right party or any radical right party elected in the parliament. And this ended in 2019 when Vox and Chega entered the two parliaments. So I'm trying to understand that. I also want some funding for a project, so I will have a survey where I will try to link the evaluation of the authoritarian past with voting for these two parties, Vox and Chega. So I will continue to work on what really stimulates me the most, which is exactly this, the connection between an authoritarian past and present populism. And it's crazy because I arrived here at the, at the perfect timing, if you want. Although, as usual, in our job, you risk that horrible, terrifying things for the rest of the population are great for what you research, but it is what it is, and this is what I'm going to research in the next years.
So I'm absolutely excited already and hyped to read the couple of interesting papers soon. So Luca, thanks so much for your time and this very personal insights into the project, into your work.
Thanks to you.
So you're very welcome. So let me conclude. Thanks for the time. And if you would like to know more about Luca's work, you can find the link to the blog and his Twitter account in the description of this recording. Thanks again, Luca, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great.